Hello and welcome back. You are in the High School OT Press Box with Evan Moesta, Jay Mike, Blake, and Joel Bryant. Lots of news to get to across the state of North Carolina, but first, let's start in Greensboro, where the center of the high school sports world will be this week for the annual North Carolina Coaches Association Clinic, Trade Show, and All-Star Games. With the East-West football game moving to December, that leaves us with 4 games across Monday and Tuesday in basketball and soccer. Let's take a deeper dive into those games. Let's start with Monday's basketball. East vs. West games at the Greensboro Coliseum's Novant Health Fieldhouse. That is the home of the Greensboro Swarm. Let's start things with the 6:30 game. That's going to be when the girls take the floor. It has a dozen players in that game from high school OT's all-state teams. That includes Amari Baldwin of Albemarle High School. She is a first-team selection from this past season. The East All-Stars, they are led by Perquimans head coach Aaron Burke and Hoggard's Boubacar All. The West will be coached by Zach MacArthur of McDowell and Ashley Poole of West Rowan. Then we move over to 8:30, the boys game. That's going to feature 10 players from high school OT's all-state teams, 1 first-teamer on each side, Janias Sharp of Reedsville, and then Nathan Fife of Sanderson. They are going to be guys to watch for. The West, they're going to be led by AC Reynolds coach Ryan Stevens alongside Jason Cosby. And then in the East, it's Triton's TJ Morrison and Calvin Campbell heading up that squad. Moving over to Tuesday, it's going to be another 6:30 and 8:30 split. It'll be girls and then boys soccer at Grimsley's Jamison Stadium. Let's start on the girls' side, where there are both, in soccer, there are a ton of all-state players in these games, especially on the boys' side. But with the girls, obviously multiple first-teamers there, including the duo of Morgan Child and Jordan Miller at Charlotte Catholic. Jared Drexler of Carborough, he's going to be the head coach of the East girls, and then Susie Hudson will be the head coach of the West girls in that game. Now let's move over to the East-West boys game in soccer at 8:30. Like I said, a lot of all-state players to watch for, including 3 first-teamers. Isaac Arrowwood of Riverside plays for the East team, along with Henry Jorge Garcia. He put up some huge goal numbers at Hobton over his career. And then Brooks Weiss, who helped lead Wakefield to a 4A state title this past fall. Those East All-Stars on the boys' side are going to be led by Jacksonville's Joey Mahachik. And then let's move over into the West. Another loaded roster there. Tyler Gibson of Providence leads this side. 3 more first-team players to look for. Quinlan Hahn, the exceptional defender over at Charlotte Catholic. Diego Silva put up some big numbers for Garinger, and another star out of Mecklenburg County, Cappy Suarez from Huff. He is a first-teamer to watch in that game. So tons of action happening across the board in the East-West All-Star games. High School OT will have coverage of that all week long. Other big news to get around to across the state. High School OT this past week announced that it will be hosting multiple football jamborees. They all start on August 9th with the 15th annual High School OT Jamboree at Trentini Stadium in Wake Forest, North Carolina, on the campus of Wake Forest High School. Later in the show, we're going to have Joel Bryant join us to break down all of the exciting matchups in that one. That Jamboree, again, August 9th, presented by the U.S. Army. And then less than a week later, High School OT is heading over to Southeast Raleigh High School and powering the Bulldog Bash. That features 4 games on Thursday, August 15th. Lots of exciting action, and it wraps up that night in the finale at 9 o'clock as Southeast Raleigh faces off against Jordan. Like we said, a ton of news came out across the week, one of which was Christ School, their boys basketball program. The 3-time or back-to-back state champions made an announcement that they are moving to play the next 2 seasons, actually, in the Nike's EYBL Scholastic Conference. If you're familiar with the AAU summer circuit, obviously the EYBL is a very prominent league for AAU basketball. They are now delving into the high school landscape and inviting 14 of the top programs across the country to participate. But because the Greenies are the back-to-back-to-back NCISAA state champions, and they will be playing in this league, they will not be eligible to play in the NCISAA state playoffs. A very interesting and unprecedented move that we haven't really seen. So to get the expert analysis on what is happening over at Christ School, we bring in Chris Womack from WLOS. Chris, how are you doing, buddy? It's been a pretty hectic summer, but this is some news that I really don't think there's a precedent for it.
There isn't, at least in the state of North Carolina. And this is something that really came hard and fast for Christ School as well. The entire conversation in April, they played in a scholastic tournament after the state championship game, winning their third in a row. So they kept the team together, went on to compete in this tournament. And at that tournament, it was the first time Josh Coley was approached about the potential of joining this league. And that conversation was framed more as, hey, can we come up to Christ School? You're a Nike elite school. We just try to make a point to go to each one of our campuses, see what it's about, make sure it's a right fit. So they came up, I believe it was early in July, it was in May. It was in May that the executives actually came up, spent the day at Christ School. And then at the end is when they said, hey, would you be interested in joining the EYBL? It's where we're looking to expand it to 16 teams potentially. You're one of the schools we're looking at. And Christ School said, yeah, absolutely, we're interested. And early July, they called and basically made the official offer. Christ School accepted. Once they were able to talk to some people, the Plumlee brothers, Mason and Miles, were involved in the decision making. It was kind of good timing because around that, when they were making that decision, the Plumlees had their basketball camp on the campus of Christ School. So they were right there in the middle of it and able to offer their 2 cents.
Yeah, so what really are the implications of something like this? Because we don't really know what to expect. I mean, obviously, they're not going to be playing games entirely in the state of North Carolina. Obviously, they already had a unique situation being where they were located geographically within the NCISAA. But, the travel, the flights, I mean, are they truly going to be playing what many would consider to be a national schedule? Absolutely.
There's a few weekends out of the year where they'll be traveling and playing, maybe for a week. I don't think it stretches much further than that, but they will be out of town for various events. And that's not any different than what they're already doing. They've played in the John Wall Invitational in DC the past few seasons. They went down to Atlanta, as I mentioned. They play a national schedule already. So this is really just an elevation of what they already do.
Chris, was there any conversations that you had with people at Christ School of how, that's a school that's been around since 1900, so 125 years of their school, how they kind of stay on mission while also having this opportunity, because it has it can really dynamically change their school. It puts them on a different kind of platform or pedestal in the basketball world, but Christ School has always been about a lot of different things. It's a boarding school, I believe some Episcopal ties, and just as they talk about how they continue to be who they are, even as this new opportunity comes in, which I'm sure is going to lead to more people being interested in going to that school.
Yeah, and that's one thing that Coach Coley really hammered home to me when I spoke to him, is that they are not going to sacrifice the culture and the mission of Christ School for a basketball player. So anybody that's interested in coming there, and he does expect there to be guys, high-level D1 recruits that, there's a new EYBL school, let me check that out. They're going to go to class. He said, we don't have an online option. You're going to be on campus. You're going to go to class. You're going to maintain a good GPA. And if you can't do that, then we're not the fit for you. So that is something that they will not sacrifice. They won't budge on. That you have to go there. You have to get good grades, and you have to kind of live out the whole Christ School values while you're there too.
Yeah, I think this is a really unique situation where, the Christ School's in a position where it has to thread a very fine needle between, you want to stick to those core values of what makes Christ School. And then you also want to be able to be competitive on this national stage. And when you're going up against some of these other academies and programs that, have different rules and regulations and different standards, again, it's a little bit tricky to thread that needle and be able to figure out, where do you stand and how do you remain competitive in doing that? Because obviously this is a program, while uber talented all of the time, and as evident by their multiple state championships, 9 since 2005. But, this is a program that was going to have a little bit of a new identity anyways this year with the graduation and movement of some players from last year. So I think that's really interesting. And, Chris, is this a one-off thing, or do you think this could be possibly a trend of what's happening where other associations and quote unquote conferences are popping up on a more national scale that could entice some teams from North Carolina to come play in it?
Yeah, I think this is something, I think the EYBL is only going to continue to expand. I mean, Christ School is a bit of an experiment on their part too, because a lot of the schools that are in there, your Oak Hill academies and IMG academies, and I don't want to knock them. I have not ever stepped foot on either of those campuses, but they seem to be sports first. That's sort of what they exist for. But Christ School is an academic first. It's obviously got the Christian influence. So this, we'll see if this works out for Nike and if Christ School is able to be competitive in that realm. And if they are, and I believe there's another one in Ohio, Spire Academy, that is also joining EYBL this year. If those two are successful, then what's to stop them from expanding to 18 next year, maybe 20 the year after that? And before we know it, maybe we're looking at, a 50 team wide type of deal. And personally, I hope it doesn't get to that. I do like state titles. I do like playing against your neighbors. And that is one thing that Christ School is going to do. They're going to continue to play their rivalry games with Asheville School and Asheville Christian and Carolina Day. But I hope that we don't start losing public schools to something like this, because that's when you really start to lose the prestige of a 4A state title, a 3A state title on down the line.
Well,
Yeah,
Chris,
sorry. I was saying, Chris, I think you make a good point there. At least with the independent schools, Christ School loves to win those state titles, compete, but public versus private, I think people sometimes forget how few private schools there are. So when Christ School wins the 4A title, they've only, they're only ahead of 15 others. And then for their other sports, did they talk to you about how when they were in conversations with the independent schools, just to make sure they had the green light to do this, how important it was for them to make sure lacrosse and soccer and football and all those sports were not affected, that the whole school was no longer, had to be kicked out of the association, that they could still compete in these other sports? How important was that to Christ School?
I think that was vitally important. And I don't think that was ever really in limbo either. Coach Coley made it sound like that was a given, that basketball was kind of a standalone thing. There's not an EYBL for football or lacrosse or soccer or anything like that. So they felt like those sports were safe. And they were also assured that after the 2-year deal, if they don't want to do it anymore, as long as the contract with Nike ends, they can come back into the NCISAA without any type of punishments or ramifications. But yeah, I don't think that Christ School would have affected the entire student body or the majority of the student body for that select few who play on the basketball team.
Yeah, and I think that was an interesting question that we may have had of, obviously the NCISA has its rules about, provisional teams that can be a part of the association but not participate in select postseason. So, it is a little bit interesting that this contract is in a way an on and off switch, where, if this isn't something that, ends up working out over the course of time, that they can get back into the NCISAA. But yeah, we really appreciate you coming on and giving this perspective. Obviously, high school sports season ramping up over the next couple of weeks for you at WLOS. What are some things that people can expect out of you guys as the fall sports season begins over the next 2-3 weeks?
Well, once football, volleyball, and soccer start practicing, we'll be getting out and doing our previews. We have 2 defending volleyball state champions in our market with Polk County and West Henderson. So we'll obviously be dropping in with them on TC Robertson. What's going to be most interesting to me is with the 8 classifications, how certain schools like Robertson, in 4A, they were very good in 4A, but there always seemed to be a ceiling. Now that it's kind of evened out and you're not playing schools who are so much bigger than you, I wonder how many state titles we're going to see here in the mountains, because honestly, they've been, you take out the Swain County girls running program, and they're kind of few and far between a lot of times. But now with the expanded classifications, it kind of opens that door for, the Robertsons and football. God knows how many football teams now have a realistic shot. But yeah, so we'll be hopping out and getting with some of the top, volleyball and soccer and cross country teams, and then obviously we do hit every single football team in our viewing area, and so it's quite the task, but we love it too.
Yeah, it was a very strong fall last year for teams out in the mountains, despite all that they had to go through. I think at the end we ended up seeing, Asheville have a strong showing in the cross country championships. You ended up seeing obviously multiple volleyball programs, and like you said, there's a lot of optimism, I think, with teams across the state where there's now 8 classifications, and you look at something like a Brevard volleyball or a Cherokee volleyball, and all of a sudden they look around and there aren't 70 other teams that they need to compete with. And so I feel like this is going to leave lots of optimism in that region of the state.
Yeah, certainly a lot of people excited out here. Of course, you've got some of them that are a little upset that they're in a certain classification. They're only 10 away from being in the lower, but it's always going to be somebody, right? I mean, sorry.
Well, it is. We love having you on. We hope to hear back from you more throughout this fall. And again, thank you for your perspective here on the Christ School. They are moving again from the NCISAA, the boys basketball program only, moving from the NCISAA to playing in Nike's EYBL Scholastic Circuit. That is Chris Womack from WLOS. We're going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, Joel Bryant will join us and take a deeper dive into the 2 high school OT football jamborees that'll be coming up in the next month. You are watching the High School OT Press Box. Welcome back into the High School OT Press Box. Eva Moesta now joined by Joel Bryant here, as over the last week, High School OT has announced 2 football jamborees that will go on during the month of August in Wake County. Like we got to in the open, let's go back over the news and notes for those jamborees. Starting with August 9th, that is the High School OT Jamboree, the 15th annual, Joel. It is at Trentini Stadium on the campus of Wake Forest High School, and it is presented by the United States Army. That is $10 admission. Games begin at 5 o'clock. The last one kicks off at 9 p.m. And as always, it'll be a Wake County Public School System clear bag policy in effect, and there will be no re-entry allowed to Trentini Stadium. But, Joel, there are 5 matchups, 10 teams, all 10 of which made the playoffs last year. What are some things that people can look out for in these games? Let's just start with each matchup beginning 5 o'clock, Corinth Holders and Southern Durham.
So Corinth Holders kind of surprised everyone last year. They went off this really great start. They won 6 games for the first time in a while. Carl Smith has done a great job leading that program after getting there from Person County. Interested to see how they look in this next year here. I know that they were pretty young last year. They had some big young linemen last year. The quarterback, David Jarman's returning. He has a good season last year. And of course, Southern Durham, they had such a good season last year. They won 10 games, but the way they went out left a really bad taste in their mouths. They got blown out by J.H. Rose, which was a 30 seed. A 30 seed went up to Durham and really just handled them. I know that Southern Durham had some injuries in that game, so they think that maybe if they were a little more healthy, they wouldn't have gone out like that. So I'm very curious to see that 2027 group at Southern Durham in particular. Tyson Broadway, the quarterback, Jonathan Dillon, the receiver, Lance Harrison, the defensive back. Those guys, it's getting close to their senior year now, so they have just a couple more years left to kind of make that championship run that they have, set in mind, and it could start August 9th, High School D Jamboree.
Then moving to the 6 o'clock game, this is a very intriguing matchup. Terry Sanford and Harnett Central, they've kind of formed their own little rivalry over the last couple of years. There's a little bit of bad blood on those two sides, but it's because they have been so competitive against one another in the times that they have squared off.
Yeah, so these two teams, they were playing in the All-American 3A, 4A conference for the past 4 years. They're being split up this year. Terry Sanford won this game handily last year, but Harnett Central brings back so much talent from last year's team, including a quarterback in Colby Howard who threw for over 30 touchdowns last year. We know that there's some bad blood in between the teams, and I like some rivalries. So I think it'll be a fun kind of tilt there, away from where they're usually playing, and the fact they're not playing this year, we want to get that one in here. I think both these teams are going to be very good. I'm very, very curious about both these teams and how they're going to compete. What's their ceiling in the playoffs? That's my question for both these teams. And I know they're both going to make it. They're both going to be playoff teams, but how far can they go this year? I think we'll get a sense of that starting August 9th.
Now, it is not the finale, but in my opinion, the best game of the day is in that 7 o'clock time slot. Cardinal Gibbons, Rolesville. If you're not in your seat at Trentini Stadium, if you don't have a bag of popcorn in your lap at that point, you're missing out. I think, Joel, this is the marquee matchup of this event.
Yeah, another example where we're taking advantage of these two teams not playing each other this year. There's no love lost between these two programs. Gibbons and Rolesville, they don't really like each other too much. Every time they play, it's always kind of a classic game. There's always just something happens at the end. There's always a tight finish. And the fact that they're not playing this year, I think that's kind of disappointing to me when I heard that. So, of course, we had to make it happen at the Jamboree. Very curious to see, what happens. Obviously, Rolesville won the most recent games, so Gibbons kind of has the chip on his shoulder now. Both these teams loaded with college prospects. There's some guys are going to be playing on Saturdays, and they're going to be making good plays on Saturdays, I think, in the future. I just can't wait for this one, and I'm glad it's kind of in the middle, so it's kind of going to be that big spike of people there in the middle. It's going to be very fascinating to see who wins it.
Yeah, obviously last year, the two times that they squared off, including the playoffs, it came down to the very end. Some really thrilling matchups between those two programs. Again, that's 7 o'clock. Cardinal Gibbons and Rolesville in the High School OT Jamboree at Wake Forest High School. The Cougars, the host team, they play in the 8 o'clock slot. A new look team for Wake Forest, and they're going up against a team in Middle Creek who has some pretty lofty expectations this year, Joel.
Yeah, Middle Creek arguably had the best JV team in the Triangle last year. They didn't really come close to losing. One of the games they played was against Pinecrest's JV team, and I think Pinecrest didn't lose another game that season, and Middle Creek held them on JV. Obviously, not everyone puts stock in the JV like I do, but I think it's very interesting. Besides the JV factor, a lot of the varsity starters from Middle Creek are back from last year. Obviously, they were a playoff team last year. The big thing is going to be at quarterback. So Hawk Schoenfeld graduated. I almost said retired. He graduated in May. They have a new quarterback named Lex Sevilla coming up, and he's very interesting. He looks pretty good in 7-on-7s. So very curious to see Middle Creek this year. I think this could be a very dangerous team down there in 7A. And then Wake Forest, they have a really good running back, Micah Olu. They have a couple of good running backs, actually, and a really good, solid offensive line. We're going to see Wake Forest kind of get more back towards probably that running kind of threat scene that people kind of became accustomed to. And, I'm just excited for this one because these two teams haven't played each other since 2019. And for those that, are around or have been around high school football in the Triangle, during the 2010s, they had multiple matchups deep in the playoffs where they were, kind of, on a collision course, and they finally met, and they ended up having some classic games. So I'm curious to see kind of these two teams play each other in this kind of new era that they're in.
Yeah, Wake Forest and Middle Creek certainly had their battles back in the mid-2010s, and both had quite a lot of NFL talent as well that were featured in those games. We move on to the finale, 9 o'clock at Trentini Stadium. It is going to be the Bulldogs of Southeast Raleigh High School facing off against Millbrook High School. Joel, you feel like both of these programs have a ton of really big prospects to look for, and then also both of these teams have some pretty lofty goals in terms of where they want to be by the end of the season.
Yeah, Southeast Raleigh being a 7A team this year, they think they can go pretty far in 7A, and Millbrook, of course, being an 8A team, they have a very good shot at going far. The 8A East is not particularly overwhelming with talent, I would say. I think the 7A classification in general is a little bit stronger, but Millbrook has a very, very good chance at getting to a state championship this year. Their strength is in that 2027 class. The rising juniors, we just talked to a couple of them the other day. They have multiple four-star prospects in that rising junior class. Quinn Cypher, the linebacker, and Rashad Streets, the defensive end. Southeast Raleigh, they have 4 guys committed to a Division I college right now. And I can't remember the last time we were able to say that for Southeast Raleigh, but it starts with the edge rusher, Keyshawn Leeser. He's going to Stanford. Was recruited by Andrew Luck. That's a pretty good story there. You were recruited by Andrew Luck to come from North Carolina to California. There must be something special about him. But this game has a lot of college talent in it, and I'm very excited to end the night with this one. I know both these teams have been wanting to play each other for a while, so it's kind of another situation where we kind of made it happen at the Jamboree because it wasn't happening during the regular season for whatever reason. So very curious to see them finally face off against each other.
Yeah, like Joel said, we'll have some preview content coming out over the coming weeks about some of the teams involved in the Jamboree and some of the top players to look out for. Again, the High School OT Jamboree, the 15th annual at Trentini Stadium on the campus of Wake Forest High School, August 9th, presented by the United States Army. A little bit of history here. The Jamboree, the High School OT Jamboree, initially began at Southeast Raleigh High School. We are going back to those roots on August 15th, powering the Southeast Raleigh Bulldog Bash. 4 matchups across that evening: Knightdale versus Cary, Sanderson versus Wilson Prep, Wake Forest versus Garner, and then the finale, Southeast Raleigh and Jordan. Joel, a lot of different teams with some intriguing profiles to them that we can expect on August 15th. Let's start with that Knightdale-Cary matchup, 2 teams that are really looking to get off on the right foot this season.
Yeah, look, neither of these teams had the season they wanted last year, but there is some talent on both teams. I'm very curious to see how they kind of do. Kind of in light of the adversity they faced last year, especially Cary. Cary had these lofty expectations last year, didn't quite achieve them. Kind of curious to see those players with kind of like that fire lit under them from last year. Curious to see how they do this year. But Knightdale, they have a couple of intriguing guys who might be prospects. The quarterback, Jamel Perry, he's a pretty good dual threat player, and then his receiver, Lara Cooper. They're both going to be juniors this year, and they've already done a lot on varsity. So curious to see them, kind of their first step of their junior year, how they do at this Bulldog Bash.
Then moving on to the second game that evening at Southeast Raleigh, it's going to be Sanderson and Wilson Prep, 2 teams who I don't think we would ever see them play each other. So this is going to be a unique stage for, these 2 programs.
Yeah, it's an interesting matchup. Wilson Prep, they think that they can compete with these larger schools. So they're playing Clayton week 1. And this will be kind of a good test for them. It's playing a big school in Sanderson. Obviously, Sanderson's not the biggest school in the state, but it's much bigger than Wilson Prep. So they're curious to see how they kind of stack up against a team with that kind of depth. And Sanderson, I know, they had a good season last year, but they're really young this year. And Coach Buck really likes these younger classes he has. He's really enjoying coaching these kids. So he's kind of excited about what they can do this year. Wilson Prep, they have so much talent back from that team last year. Their quarterback, Trayvon Usher, is one of the most productive players in the state. So yeah, very, very intrigued by Wilson Prep in this matchup. Just how exactly is it going to look against the larger team? All their guys pretty much go both ways. So Sanderson's not going to have that going on as much. So very kind of curious to see, especially in the second half of that running clock Jamboree game.
We already talked a little bit about Wake Forest, but the Cougars are going to be having a nice little Wake County 7A matchup in this Bulldog Bash. They'll be taking on Garner, and Garner is a program that, a lot like Wake Forest, has been storied for quite some time, but the Trojans once again are starting to reach some of the heights of their powers, right?
Yeah, under Jerron Donald, they've had a really, really good, promising kind of a program here. So people forget, when he first got there, they were coming off like their worst season ever. And since he's gone there, Garner's been to the playoffs 2 times. So I think it's going in the right direction for Garner. They're going to miss that running back they had last year, Devin Grant. He was a very productive player. But at quarterback, Christian Ormody finally has a chance to kind of be like the main guy. There was another quarterback there. They're kind of splitting time over his first couple of years. So he's going to be intriguing to see him take, basically all the snaps this year and how he does as the main guy there. Garner has a couple of really good pieces in the secondary who are college prospects. And yeah, so it's going to be interesting. This is another kind of classic Wake Forest matchup where they played Garner a bunch in the past. There have been some good matchups. So curious to see it at this Bulldog Bash. I'm getting mixed up with the Jamboree because we have two now.
And then finally, the finale, we touched a little bit on some of the star power Southeast Raleigh as they participate in the HSOT Jamboree, but they will take center stage in their Bulldog Bash against Jordan. Joel, there's a lot of playmakers, I would say, on both sides of this one. One name you didn't mention earlier was Christian Freeman, who is NC State's first 2027 commit in state. So lots of guys to look for in this Southeast Raleigh versus Jordan matchup.
Yeah, they also have the quarterback Tydreek Powell. He's committed to Gardner Webb. The running back Robert McCullough. He's committed to Campbell. So they're pretty stacked with college talent. Southeast Raleigh is. And the thing with Jordan, so people are gonna have to understand this with Jordan. Obviously, Amarion Blue, the star running back, is not there. Blue had, I think, like 4 straight 2,000-yard seasons, something crazy like that. He was crazy productive his whole career. But he's basically the only player that they lost from last year. I think they have 19 starters back from last year's team. They've gotten some new faces in. The quarterback, Landon Melton, was super efficient last year. They weren't even throwing the ball that much. So very curious to see Jordan this year. I think people might be counting them out a little bit, but I'm telling you, in the 8A East, I think it's wide open. And Jordan could take a very interesting first step at this Jamboree.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. Also, Melton now has a full season under his belt at Jordan and being able to see what all he is able to provide for the Falcons that year.
And one thing on him is he got there last year. He transferred from Hillside. He got there like really close to the season, so he didn't have a whole off season at all. And now he's had the whole off season under Coach King, a full off season, and just kind of getting even better at what they do. Just really feeling out the system even better. So yeah, he could really have a nice season this year as a senior.
Again, that is the Southeast Raleigh Bulldog Bash, August 15th at Southeast Raleigh High School, powered by HighSchoolOT. Knightdale, Cary, Sanderson, Wilson Prep, Wake Forest, Garner, Southeast Raleigh, and Jordan. If you want to see information on this event and the HighSchoolOT Jamboree, just head on over to highschoolot.com/football, and all of that coverage will be there. We're going to bring back in J. Mike Blake here as we shift the conversation a little bit to high school football in a way, but a more overarching topic in the culture of high school sports and the current state of high school sports in North Carolina. And that is transfers, which is a interesting, touchy, fragile topic, a topic that some would like for us maybe not to talk about because maybe if it's not talked about, it goes away. But I think we could also maybe make the argument that if we don't talk about it, then maybe it gets more prevalent and there aren't guardrails and there are not guidelines. So if you have not already, J. Mike published a column on Sunday regarding what transfers look like in the state of North Carolina and what some of those guardrails are that are in place right now. Obviously the NCISAA, has a blanket rule, a 365 rule that if you are transferring for athletic reasons, then that is something that you would have to sit out a year. Now, obviously a lot of, school districts and a lot of individual programs have ways of bypassing that for good, bad, or ugly reasons. But I think one of the interesting things is that this is met with a lot of mixed emotion. And there are, as I believe on Friday, it's like a little bit of an onion. It's got a lot of layers to it. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. But I feel like when the arguments happen around transfers and what that all looks like, people try to point fingers in directions where maybe people aren't pointing in the right direction or pointing out the wrong reasons relating to the wrong points that are being made. So, J. Mike, you and Joel obviously feel very passionate about this, but, what was really the crux of, your column, and what kind of fired you up to be able to, put that out and, really start some dialogue about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to transferring in the state of North Carolina.
Well, this is an idea of a column that I've had for a while of, hey, like whatever the current rule is, it's not going away. Transfers are not. The rule currently, as it's read, is not really being executed, and it's because it's really a toothless rule. So what I did is I was able to look at some other states and kind of compare, and then come up with my own idea for transfers. Because if you read the headlines, you'll see Georgia came up with a transfer policy. South Carolina came up with a transfer policy. New Jersey came up with a transfer policy. And depending on who you listen to, you may get a different opinion about whether it was good or bad. But in North Carolina, what is our transfer policy? I think people would be surprised at just how moot it becomes. Yes, you're supposed to sit out 365 days unless you have a bona fide move. Unless you have literally, like, your family sold this house, you're moving into this house, and you're done. Or this lease expired and now you're in this neighborhood. You're supposed to sit out 365 days. I think the only person I know that had to sit out 365 days, we're going all the way back to how Hollywood Smothers missed his senior year at West Charlotte. He was at Chambers, and then he was going to West Charlotte, and then he was ineligible for that year and did not play. That's the only one I remember. The reason why it's so few and far between is because there are two kind of caveats that really render everything else meaningless. The first one is if both schools sign off on it. Well, I know of some schools that sign off on all of them because they're like, I'm not going to be the bad guy here. Of course, go play. So what the 365 means nothing. And then the other part is, well, if the school district says, oh, you can't move from school A to school B within the county, we're stopping that. What this does is some districts have to now spend a lot of resources on figuring out if people are in the right neighborhoods. And that's not what school districts are supposed to be doing. Like, they're not the FBI. They're not supposed to go knock on doors and make sure people live there. That's not why school districts exist. So what I came up with was a blanket rule. You apply it everywhere, because you know what? Sometimes it is a legitimate move, but other times the legitimate move is still a little bit of undue influence. Like, how do you go from this school on one side of the state to the other side of the state? Oh, I see a connection here. People know that sometimes it's for good reasons. Sometimes there's some stuff going on. So what's the best way to handle this? Well, instead of having 365 and then no one sits out 365, why not just say everyone's got to sit out X amount of games, depending on the sport. Doesn't matter, whatever it is. So that was my idea. I got that, actually. I looked at the different states. Georgia makes you submit all sorts of paperwork now. They have basically a clearinghouse where you have to show that you have vacated your old premises and you have moved into your next one. Some people were like, well, Georgia just made it easier to transfer for kids. Not really. They actually made it harder because you have to have all this proof to the state, not the school district. North Carolina lets the school districts kind of map it out. And South Carolina, yes, they did a one-time transfer, and people were like, oh, that's good. Well, guys, there's nobody transfers two times unless you're in an independent school area. Like, other public school people usually transfer twice. So that doesn't really mean anything. And I think what people miss is South Carolina didn't do that to be easier on the athletes. It's easier on them. They don't have to enforce as much because there aren't a whole lot of people transferring twice. So they just blanketly say you can transfer once. It makes it easier on the people in charge. New Jersey went a little bit of a different route with their seniors. So if you transfer after your junior year and you could be ring chasing, what New Jersey decided to do was say you must sit out a third of the season. And I took that rule and said, you know what, if you just told a kid, yeah, you can go to that school, but you have to miss the first 6 basketball games, which is like 3 weeks, 3 football games, which again, 3 weeks. So a lot of kids would be like, yeah, that's cool. I'm going, I would want to go there anyway. And then all of a sudden, everything else, we don't need schools to knock on doors and be the FBI. We don't need families to worry about, are they doing the right paperwork, And honestly, if some people are scamming the system, now they don't have to all these, workarounds, because you're good to transfer. You're just going to have to sit out a few games. I think that's a fair trade-off. There has to be some skin in the game for the recipients and for the people involved, that's not overly punitive to families, because I get it from the family perspective too. And I get it from the coach's perspectives. There's a lot of different layers, a lot of different people. Any coach that gets transfers will tell you that after a few years, people come up to them wanting to go there, and it's not them reaching out. And so this, to me, kind of takes a little bit of the heat off if people are transferring into your school. Like, well, yeah, they're transferring in, but they all know they have to sit this many games. That's the way I took it. I think the people who want people to sit out a full year that's kind of a crazy idea. That's never coming back. North Carolina, we have that rule, but no one actually does it. And I think, playing right away, some people say that's a little bit too lenient. To me, this was a sweet spot. So, Joel, I don't know what you think. You've had some thoughts about it, and you've talked to people who have experienced all sides of the transfer debate as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I haven't fully decided what I think of your proposal yet, J. Mike. I'm still thinking about it, still stewing it over. Obviously, there are situations that are legitimate where, a parent gets a job this other side of the state, the whole family has to go over there. Sometimes there are things that happen, maybe an illness in the family. We had that example sent to us. Obviously, we're not really talking about all those, really legitimate examples. We're talking about really, frankly, the prevalence of under recruiting that is happening in this state. We a lot of people know what's going on. It's just not really out there in the open. There are a lot of tactics now that programs use, and really, I would say a lot of it's not even the coaches. I don't really think it's the coaches. I think there are people that might be doing it for them, whether that's the players, or we've heard a lot about parents getting involved in this kind of stuff, parents acting like pseudo GMs of a program. So I think this is kind of what we're talking about mostly. I know people got upset about a thing that I posted the other day and J. Mike's column today. Well, what happens if it's like a legitimate situation? We're not talking about that. So frankly, we're not. So just try to analyze what we're actually trying to get across. The main point is we're trying to get across. I think that before we try something like what J. Mike has proposed, I think there are a lot of, there are rules that we have that we're not really enforcing now. I'd be curious to see what this landscape would look like with more enforcement of what we have. We have a whole rule that was basically installed after one player transferred to a high school ahead of like the 2017, 2016 season, where you're not allowed to follow a coach you played for at the previous school. So if the coach goes to a new school, you cannot transfer to that school. This rule has been in place since then, and I have not seen it enforced once. And this happens multiple times a year where players are going to the school where their coach has gone to, and it has not been enforced once. So there are things like that I think we should try to experiment actually enforcing before we maybe do a big policy like this. I'm just curious to see what it would look like if we were kind of making sure that the loose ends were tied up, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I think where I'm coming from also is, look, school districts, if you are a stickler for transfers in your district, and right next door are a few schools in a county that is a little bit, I don't want to say they are letting things slide, but there's more transfers. Like after a while, you're the athletic director for the county, or you're the superintendent for your county, and your county coaches are mad at you for doing your job because the person next door who you share a conference with is not, or is allowing transfers. So you have to be the bad guy. To me, this is a rare case. Usually one size fits all is a terrible idea in so many situations, but sports are really unique. You can't compare this to, as much as sports is a co-curricular that goes with drama and the arts and band and all these other great things the high school gives you experience of doing. It's really different because it's a zero-sum game. You go out and you compete, and that team doesn't have those players anymore. And this team does have those players, and they're competing for state championships that are put on the banners in the school and on the welcome to fill in the blank towns, billboards and things like that. So it does matter, and we should look at them. But I think the only way to do it where we stop putting all this pressure onto every parent to prove it's legit, we start putting pressure, because obviously, you can have a sick relative, and then people are like, well, how sick are they? Well, how about just saying, okay, we get it, come on in, you have to sit out the first 3 weeks of the season. To me, that's so much better for everybody involved. Districts school districts should be out here doing the best to support students and teachers, not, going and discovering every transfer in their area. New Jersey actually has a transfer portal, by the way. They have a legit, it's called a transfer portal. And it is, they say you can transfer once, but you have to enter your name into this transfer portal. Now, I included this as a column. It's a little bit in the weeds, but this is nothing the folks in Chapel Hill can do. This is not a Q Tucker. This is not a board of directors. All the eligibility rules have to come from the State Board of Education. I think the State Board of Education could possibly, look at this in the future, because I don't think that State Board of Education gets as much heat and pressure as Q and the board do get pressure when they make certain decisions. At the same time, I understand this to me may not be popular. I knew it was going to get pushed back no matter what you say. But to me, there are states that say sit out a full year, and there are states that say go ahead and play right away. And I'm just thinking there is a middle ground that is only right now used in a few places, including New Jersey senior year. Why not take that and kind of use that as something smart? I mean, honestly, the NCAA could probably look at that, because people are like, people are transferring, all over, 4 colleges in 4 years. We're not getting 4 high schools in 4 years in high school.
There are some cases of that. Not enough that I come in contact with, unless I guess when I'm doing all state, looking through the candidates and things like that. But I kind of lost my train of thought there. But it wouldn't hurt the NCAA to have that as a safeguard too, right? Why you're going to this school? Well, okay, you can't play in Maui, in that first, and if the guy's okay with that, he's like, yeah, it's actually about being at that school and, March Madness, then he'll be fine with it. It's a little bit of skin in the game. I think coaches are in a tough spot, because you have some coaches that, are like, hey, kids want to play here. You have other coaches that are like, I'm trying to build my program and everyone keeps leaving before I can actually build it. I'm not able to start a program the way somebody was just 10 years ago. And so they're in a tough spot. Parents in a tough spot. Coaches, school districts, one size fits all actually helps out a lot of people more than it hurts.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how many different angles there are to this, and there is not one rule, that is just going to magically pop up. And I mean, there's no rule that I think can come across at this rate in the NCHSA or anything like that will make everybody happy. But there are so many unique situations and unique circumstances that come across. But like Joel said, this is not a case of I don't think the root of J Mike's column or some of Joel's thoughts on the culture of high school transfers are based around the ones where there is a legitimate background and reasoning towards it. Obviously what Joel posted was more of just the culture of it's a little bit different nowadays, because a kid can go move across move to a conference rival, or, just completely just leave a program and go across the county or across the region. And, there's definitely a interesting vibe now of just all right, man, good luck. Go be great. Everything's cool. And that's just more of maybe we're getting older. Maybe it's a get off our lawn type thing. But back in our day, it used to be a case where it was oh, come on, you're leaving my program. All right, cool. There are people who had a lot of pride. I don't think that pride is completely gone, especially when they get between the lines. But at least on social media, it is a very interesting optic, Joel, to kind of see a kid go to a conference rival, and then his teammate says, "Oh man, good luck, man. You're gonna do great."
I was just asking, when did this change happen? Because, I was in high school not even 10 years ago. Thankfully, I am getting old, but not that old. Where, this would happen to my school. And then we'd be like, why'd you do that? Now you're the enemy. We're going to have to beat you now. And now all these kids just go go be great and all this stuff. So I just have to remind myself, these kids have grown up in a different era, right? These are the kids that saw Kevin Durant join the 70-win Warriors. These are the kids that have grown up with the college football transfer portal. So they've been exposed to a lot more than we were exposed to kind of growing up. And this is just commonplace for these kids. I don't think, I have to remind myself, they might not mean it kind of with a mean intent. A lot of cases, they are just kind of looking out for themselves, and they want to go to a place where they can win better, or a place where I guess the argument is they can be seen better, even though I push back against that because we're the most connected humans of all time. We all have huddle tapes. We all have social media. We can share this stuff. I still believe they will find you no matter where you are if you're good enough. So that's an element of it as well. It's just interesting. I was just kind of like an early morning like grouchy thought. It ended up being like this whole thing. I didn't respond to anybody. But yeah, it's definitely a hot button topic. People are very passionate about it on both sides, and I'm really fascinated. Like, what does this look like over the next few years? Like, is something going to be actionable on this? Like South Carolina, like Georgia, like New Jersey, are we going in that direction, or is it just going to be, this is just going to keep happening, and people are just going to keep getting bad on both sides of it? So I'm not sure.
Yeah, right now I think if yes, there are obviously legitimate reasons to move. I have taught kids who have transferred into our school, and I've taught kids who have left the school. And I don't think a single one of them would say, oh, if I have to, sit out a couple of games, I'm not sure I can make the move. Of course, the transfers that do come to my school have sat out the entire year. In most cases, there was an exception around the COVID era, and one that whose dad was the coach, and that was it. So I think people would be accepting it. Some people try to look at my column, or maybe not read, maybe look at the headline and say, oh, you're trying to punish kids. Oh, you're looking at kids as property. Nothing could be further from the truth. But I think holistically, you look at the state of competition. At some point, there are rules for competition for a reason, and you have to do what is best for everyone within competition while also being reasonable. Again, the current rule says sit out an entire year. That is what it says. And then, of course, there's caveats that really take the teeth out of it. I'm just saying, why don't we just make it a couple games? And then I think that actually takes the scrutiny off the kids and off the parents. Because right now, all of us have probably heard this urban myth of, these parents, they faked the separation so they would move, or they faked this paperwork so they would get to this school. They would do this, they would do that. Sometimes that rumor mill is wrong. They're flat out wrong. And if you know the parents or the kids, it's wrong, but it's out there. So I think this actually kills that rumor mill, because now everybody is on equal ground, equal footing. And I think it kind of advances it forward because it's not stopping. And I think, Joel, you touched on a little bit of, cultural things. The other thing is look at the generation that are the parents, right? This is my generation. My oldest is not in high school, but we'll be there one day. So it's like now the Gen Xers and the millennials are parents. We grew up really in this high school sports area, kind of pre-max preps, but a lot of pride in your community, a lot of pride in your high school. However, we also, looking back at those days, kind of think, well, what if? Maybe, how many times have you heard it's kind of a, almost a meme in itself of a guy talking to you at a bar and saying, I could have been D1 if I hadn't hurt my knee on JV football. Like, these guys take that mindset, and gosh knows, like, if I let my mind drift, I could be like, you know what? I could have been pretty good at tennis if I had picked it up before my senior year. Like, I started to think those things, and then you have your own family, and you're starting to think, well, maybe I should put them in a better situation. Not me, but other parents are probably like, would I have been better off athletically if I had gone to the school down the road, or if I had gone to this school? And you start to see what the others are doing. Now you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, because that parent down the street, he gets his kid, into this school. Let me try to see what I can do. So I think the parents have a lot. NCAA transfers are different from high schools for one fundamental reason at minimum, and that is a parent or guardian has to sign off on all of this. So we are talking about families. We are talking about parents. They're also coming at from a different perspective, whereas previous generations, like, the boomer generation, there's like transfer schools. Like, no, like, also in a lot of cases, maybe they had like a forever home and they weren't willing to either move or try to fake a move or anything like that. Whereas now North Carolina is booming so much. There's so much housing. People are already in their second and third homes, or they're leasing. It's so much easier to move than ever. And it's not just any one particular school. I think I pointed this out in the column, and that's what I'm trying to hit at here. It's not about the magnet schools and the open enrollment districts. Some of the schools that get the most transfers or the most impactful transfers have a town name on it, or this side of the county name, because they're just a regular public school, but people still transfer in. And so it's a lot more complex than people think. So that's when everyone gets into the let's level the playing field and go after open enrollment districts and magnet schools and all this. I'm like, not necessarily. Like, I'm sure there are some of those that get transfers, but it's kind of prevalent. I think half of the football finalists last year had at least one, maybe all but two, actually. I mean, more than half had one really high impact transfer. Basketball finalists, I think all but like one or two, boys and girls combined, had a transfer starting. You take all 32 of the Final Four participants, boys and girls, 16 had a transfer starting, 16 did not. And the 16 that did not, some of them were rural schools like Cherokee, East Bladen, and some of them were, and one of them was a parochial school. Bishop McGinnis had no transfer. So it's not, there's no, like, if you tried to put it all in one box and one label, it's going to be kind of difficult. However, the only way you can really try to be fair, and what I was arguing, is a one-size-fits-all rule that just has a little bit enough skin in the game to discourage people ring chasing or people who are doing this that have not thought beyond the next year. A lot of kids, again, the ones I taught who transfer out of our school, I think they were going no matter what. You've told them to sit out 2 games, 3 games, 4 games, 5 games. They were probably going to go no matter what and be okay with it. So I don't think it actually punishes anybody. I just think it kind of takes that topic and makes it a lot more palatable for everybody, and it's good within the spirit of competition.
Well, I definitely think that when you look at this transfer space, obviously there are people who feel as if we are too nice to transfers. There are some that feel that we are too mean to transfers. But
you'll get the same responses, whatever you say. Like, people will come from both sides. I do want to get into the one thing that we do at High School OT. We have a tracker that tracks kind of the impact transfers that are announced by these kids on social media. In some cases, a few cases, it is a parent telling us or is a coach telling us. I just want to kind of get into that a little bit, because there's an argument out there that we're kind of glamorizing it, and that's just not the case. I mean, in the past, I had kind of tweeted out names of players that have transferred. If you notice, I haven't done that lately. I haven't posted any pictures of it. I did get that feedback. I did get that feedback about people thinking that I was glamorizing it. It wasn't my intention, but I could see why they would think that. So I took that feedback and I stopped doing the names publicly. So every time I send it out, it's always like, hey, something happened. If you want to see it, you can go see it. So the transfer list. This whole thing happened because a few years ago, I'm doing my thing. I'm covering football in the off season. I'm doing like my returning players list, like the top players in this category and all this stuff. And almost every time I would post one of these lists of like the 15 names, I would get something like, that person's not at that school. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, how are they already at a different school? This is April. And it just kept happening. And there was one instance when I had written something, I'd written a preview about a team, and I kind of had this big section about this one player on this team and how this team is going to be competitive because they have this guy in that spot. Then after I ran it, turns out that guy's not there. So I decided to start keeping track of this because no one else was doing it. And I don't know how I'm supposed to know if a player's not on a team, if there's not anyone keeping track of it. So I started keeping track of it. And when I got the list, I started realizing this has become very prevalent. And I thought that this would be something that people might want to know about. So I would say to anyone that is against transfers and who wants something changed, who wants a policy like J. Mike has proposed to happen to North Carolina, it's not necessarily a bad thing that I'm keeping track of these names for you. I would say that if you're someone that wants this to change, it's good that an outlet like this is keeping track of it, so we see what's happening, and so people can kind of make a judgment based off of that. So that's all I'll say on that.
Well, I think we should go WWE style and week 1 of the football season, just see who takes the field and have crazy reactions to Joel and I joked last year that we should have gone to the first Reedsville game and just been absolutely shocked that Kendra Harrison wasn't there. Things like that. But I think that's definitely the best way to summarize it all.
I don't think putting your head in the sand is helpful if you're someone that wants this stuff to stop. Obviously it's grimy, it's uncomfortable, but it has to be covered in some way, or otherwise you're not being honest. You're not doing a good job as a reporter. So that's just what I would say on that. It's not because I'm trying to like glamorize it. I'm just trying to kind of keep track there for people that are interested in this.
Yeah, and just for full transparency, when this is how this happens, Joel and I are sitting in the office scrolling through social media, and it's like, oh, hey, kid at this school just transferred to this school. And then
With
it's
a
like,
full-on like jersey swap graphic, mind you.
yeah, a ton of that. Like,
That's
nothing
glamorizing. Like
That's
whoever's
glamorizing.
making the jersey swap graphic, that's actually glamorizing the transfer.
And
I
so
will say, I've seen I've seen some stuff on Instagram this year happen where someone is sharing that this player transferred and it literally didn't happen. It didn't happen. So there's different
rumor
levels.
mill is wild.
Yeah,
And the rumor mill is not, I always say 10% of high school transfer rumors you hear are actual rumors that will happen. 90% is just all just through the grapevine stuff, because if we were to put together a team of kids that we heard were going to a certain school, my goodness, like state championships would only be going to a couple of programs every year based on rumors and what people are hearing about somebody going to some school. So we wait until the very end when it's confirmed. There are no rumors. There's none of that, but it is mostly Joel and I saying, oh, okay, this kid went to that school. Let's add it to the tracker. And it's not some celebration or something glamorous. And I think, like I said on Twitter a couple days ago, if there is a kid out there who is transferring high schools because they want to see their name on a bullet point behind a high school OT paywall,
which they're probably not even paying for.
Reach out to us. That'd be shocking. But I think we have a far greater issue if that's the issue there.
I'll say this one last thing. You know, the association in its previous transfer policy was really kind of like letting local control, right? You know, the local district will determine if it was a bona fide move. The local district will determine, if the school will decide if you're going to sign off on a transfer, which that was actually put in place because kids were leaving charter schools to go to their neighborhood public school, and they were having to sit out 365 days because they didn't move because, charter schools, school of choice. So that was put in there. But you can't just delegate something that's this important. And I think that's why you have Georgia saying, actually, we are going to okay all your paperwork and you have to prove. And New Jersey says, okay, yeah, you can transfer once, but you have to enter into our system, kind of bringing those things to themselves. North Carolina can't even do that right now if they wanted to. So that's something that has to start at State Board of Education and would have to emanate from there. And I think the only way they would even touch something like this is if they could find something that they could just apply to any situation and not have to create more work for themselves. And then, last thing I would say, in case anyone, thinks about the intention of what I was writing, that was against a certain school or against a transfer. One, I do not keep up with transfers aside from what Joel and Evan put on. I'm not into the rumor mill or anything like that. So I'm not thinking of anybody when I write these things. Second is I have wished for nothing but success for my former students that transfer out. So I get it. I know they're kids. I don't look at them as stats on Max Preps or anything like that. But also know that, and I'll go back to Joel here, sometimes go be great in the comments from some of those kids. Different things are being said in the locker room and in the hallways other than go be great when those things happen. There's always a little bit of a fire there. So what you see on the outside, I think that is also something in the way social media has changed, is sometimes those comments, everyone knows what is expected to be said, and so they say it, but that old competitive fire that's always been there still exists today.
Well, if anybody has any questions involving whether it's J. Mike's column, Joel's perspective on who has moved where in the basketball or the football landscape, we're always available. You can email us, HighSchoolOT@WRL.com. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We do scrub through those comments and read your input and take it all in. So, yeah, good, bad, or ugly, please ask questions about this. We don't take any offense to where people are coming from in their opinions on this matter. But yeah, we would love to continue this dialogue as this progresses. And then obviously we want to get to a point where there is a little bit more clarity on this issue in the high school sports world. Again, lots coming up this upcoming week for High School OT. We will be in Greensboro covering the NCCA East-West All-Star Games July 21st and 22nd. Tomorrow, Monday, will be the girls and the boys basketball game that will be at the Novant Health Fieldhouse. And then Tuesday will be soccer over at Jamison Stadium on the campus of Grimsley High School. We have some more all-state teams coming out, and we will continue to preview the upcoming fall sports season and the 2 High School OT football jamborees that have been announced, one of which being the 15th annual High School OT Jamboree at Trentini Stadium at Wake Forest High School that is presented by the United States Army. And then on August 15th, High School OT is powering the Southeast Raleigh Bulldog Bash. For Evan Moesta, J. Mike Blake, and Joel Bryant, we will see you next week and step back inside of the High School OT Press Box.